My name is Terry Williams. I currently work for the Okanagan Conservation District. I am a conservation planner trainer with OCD. We were just talking that due to funding, I may not be there very much longer under that particular umbrella, but I am always doing fun things on YouTube, and I'm always available through my business email, which I'll give you at the end of the presentation. And you're welcome to send me questions, ideas, thoughts, or whatever. So this particular presentation, we're partnering with our great friends, the Center for Technical Development, and actually been very proud to have been part of the beginnings of the center of the CTD back, oh gosh, 10, 15 years ago. So I'm loving Jan. She's doing a great job, and she's got lots of good resources for you guys. So today we're going to learn about one-on-one communications, like with landowners or partner employees or something like that. We're going to talk a little bit about dealing with difficult situations. We're going to talk about institutional communications when you're representing the conservation district in some capacity. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about writing, because writing is also a communication skill. You may be asked to write, like I said, newsletter articles. You might be asked to write white papers, and we'll talk about what those are and how to write them effectively. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about organizing and leading meetings, because if you're here for very long, you're going to end up leading a meeting. And so it's a good idea to have some tools in your back pocket for that. So I know this sounds weird, but people are really animals. I am a sheep farmer, and I've learned something called low stress livestock handling. And what I learned through learning those techniques of moving animals without waving your arms and yelling at them is that understanding your animal and understanding their nature is going to help you accomplish the goals that you have for those animals. So people are also animals, and there are some things that help when you're trying to communicate with them. One is that they're generally pretty focused on the day-to-day stuff, and they're more apt to react than to act. A lot of people don't plan ahead. They're often focused on the tasks that they have to do today. Oftentimes they're feeling a little bit defensive or rushed about things. And so the more that you can help them kind of feel like, oh, okay, we're going to now take the time to, get a bigger picture view. If you can talk with them about that, then that can kind of help lead them from where they are to where you want them to be kind of mentally when you're communicating with them. They also tend to be a little bit reactive, and we all know about that fight or flight response. And so oftentimes, well, probably not oftentimes, because if you have a cooperator that's requested assistance, they're already kind of gotten beyond that fight or flight mode. But if you're dealing with someone for the first time, they're going to be a little defensive and wonder who you are. They're going to wonder about your motives. They're going to wonder what the programs are all about and whether they're going to be good for them or not. And so they're going to be a little bit defensive, and you want to be able to use techniques to overcome that initial resistance. They also tend to be goal-oriented when the goals are compelling for them. So we're going to try to couch our conversations in a way that helps them to achieve the goals that they have. What I love about the conservation district work is that we're not regulatory. And so we're not there to get in their face or tell them that they're doing something bad. We're actually trying to help them be motivated to do good things, or to encourage them and actually honor them for the work that they're already doing. So we definitely want to keep those goals, those end goals in mind. So some more general principles is respect and honoring another's experience. I'm going to give you an example of this a little bit later, but I learned a long time ago that everybody deserves respect, even if they're ornery, cranky people. They still have something to contribute. And oftentimes the orneriness or the crankiness is because they aren't being heard, they aren't feeling heard about what they have to say, and they're in that reactionary, resistant, defensive mode. And if we can kind of get them past that, then their experience is going to be super helpful to you. Uh, Also, we want to be practicing some empathy, understanding another person's situation, and really feeling for their situation. Oftentimes, cooperators are in a bad place with something that's going wrong, and understanding and then feeling some empathy for them can really build a bridge between you and them. And if you can assist them then in helping them overcome some of these challenges, you'll be their ally and on their side, and they'll be way more open to talking with you about things and giving you the full truth about things. And then we want to really focus on that target. What is the real end goal? Oftentimes I feel like people, they kind of see the initial goal, but they don't see the end goal very readily. It takes a little while of getting our minds kind of popped out of the day to day and into something a little bit longer term. And so sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I've got this, the the cows are getting out, so we need this fence." That's not the end goal. that's that's a short term, right now we need to fix this problem kind of goal. But what is their real end goal? Their real end goal is maybe increasing their production on that field. Maybe they want to have, maybe they want healthier cattle, and they don't want the cattle going in where they can get into weeds or bad toxic stuff or something. That end goal is really what we want to focus on, because oftentimes the short-term goals, sometimes they'll get in our way of actually solving the end goal. So we're gonna really focus on that end goal, and ourselves. We have to kind of pop ourselves out of that thinking as well, because we as human beings are sort of short-term thinkers. So in these one-on-one interactions, your first impressions really matter. Um, you're going to be representing your conservation district, and so I feel like sometimes in these one-on-one interactions, we might get a little nervous. We might be a little on edge about what might happen, or how they'll respond to us. But just remember that you are a representative of a larger organization, and sometimes that can actually help you feel less nervous because you've got the backing of your conservation district. You've got other planners who can help you. The first day I went out on a site visit, I was asked to go to somebody I didn't know, and she was asking me all kinds of questions about programs. And I said, you know what? I don't know, but I will go back and find out. And because I had that backing of the CD employees, and I knew that I could go to them and ask them questions, and we could get the answers for that cooperator, it was fine as long as I was listening to her, understood kind of what her problems were, and then I could go back and then, made a commitment to go back and follow up with her. She was fine with that, even though I didn't know diddly squat anything. um, I was just ignorant as heck. I had that backing of the other CD employees. Now we want to really be open, and especially in that first contact with someone, they're going to respond if you come in with sort of a calm, confident, and friendly manner. I worked with a 450 different landowners during the large fires we had in Okanagan County in 2014 and 2015, and I oftentimes went. The people were very stressed out. They had just experienced this large natural disaster. They were in shell shock, really. But I came in and actually kind of treated them as if they were my best friend. And I let them talk, and I commiserated with them and let them kind of vent a little bit. And then I helped them kind of see the next steps. So if you can kind of think of that, like pretend that you're a good friend of theirs and treat them that way, people will respond really openly to that, and be very grateful actually for that kind of treatment. And then you definitely want to have good grooming. I know this is something I probably shouldn't even talk about, but and it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to wear your dinner theater clothes or something. You should be clean and neat though, because you are representing the conservation district, and that first impression is really important. So I'm going to give you something that I think will also help you. This is the kind of some things I've noticed in general about cooperators, and this is not meant to mean that everybody is the same, but oftentimes, especially agricultural producers, will have these kind of perspectives. They work really hard. They work hard, long hours every day. They may not ever take vacations. They sometimes will get away from the farm, but not very often. And much of their work is very solitary and it's unseen or misunderstood by other people. And so, if you can understand that and come in uh, with that attitude of kind of being open to what they're doing, and maybe even give them some recognition about that, like give compliment them on something that they're doing right, they're going to really respond to that. Because they're seldom recognized for the hard work that they do, and frankly none of us would eat without them, so we all have a vested interest in being grateful to these folks for producing food for us. Economically, they are often in a cash flow bind, so it may be that their operation is working really well, but in that season, there are going to be times where money is coming in, a lot of money's coming in, but then oftentimes it goes right out again, and so they're oftentimes kind of on the edge financially. And so if we can help them by phasing out projects instead of doing them all at once, if we can be really aware of that kind of feast or famine kind of stuff that happens with their economic situation, then we can really be helpful to them by and just get creative about that. How can we make this not so burdensome for them or have it happen at a certain time so that it works well with their finances? Kind of getting into their perspective and seeing how that works for them can really be helpful. And then oftentimes, some of these folks have been working in their generations on the same farm. And sometimes those traditions are really, really, sometimes they're really helpful, and sometimes they kind of get in the way of conservation work. But it takes a lot of time and effort and oftentimes money to change the methods that they're using. So also being kind of aware of that and figuring out ways to, if they're willing to change something and you can guide them and help them with that, and you can reduce the cost or the effort or the time, that it can be really helpful for them. And they'll be really grateful, actually. So, in your conversations with cooperators, I use what's called the Goldilocks principle. You want it to be just right. You don't want to be, and I have trouble with this myself, which is why I'm talking about it, because I talk a lot and I'm likely to get into a real friendly conversation and be there for way longer than I need to be there. Sometimes the cooperators kind of need that, and sometimes, frankly, I have talked for too long. So you want to be clear. You want to communicate things, get to the point, and not take too long to get there. You want to give them ample information, but not too much info. Like, you want to be honest with them about all the things that are really important, but you don't necessarily have to give them all the info about everything. Okay. I tend to kind of go, oh, I'm a plant geek, so I'm going to talk about all these different plants and, you know, how they can be used medicinally and stuff. And that might be appropriate, but I wouldn't go too far in that direction. And then I put in enough chat to be friendly. So, ask them how their family's doing, ask them how things are going, ask them, maybe some of their grandkids, and sometimes that's a bridge into a good conversation with someone because they'll learn to trust you. But you do want to balance that, right? You don't want to spend 10 hours on a site either. That's not using the funds that we've been given from taxpayers, basically. That's not a responsible use of that time to spend too much time with that. So we want that to be just right. Okay. Now, here's some ways that you can have some confidence with speaking with your cooperators. Again, being respectful of their time. If they're in a hurry, making sure that you're not going on and on and on when they're in a big hurry, making sure that your time is being used pretty efficiently on site. I would always find something to compliment about their operation, about the way their cows look, about the fact that they've been trying really hard at something and putting a lot of effort in. Some There can be something on every site, even terrible sites, to compliment. Okay, find that thing and bring it up because again, that response of having someone appreciate what they're doing when it's such hard work and so solitary is really helpful. I always ask my cooperators a lot of questions because I want to learn more about the things that they're doing. I also want to be able to compare different people's experiences. Excuse me. I want to be able to gain more experience in my job by understanding more about what they're doing. So I always ask a ton of questions. And then when you're speaking on the phone, definitely take the time to speak slowly and clearly. Sometimes when you're talking on the phone, you can get a little nervous and you'll speed up your speech, and people won't be able to understand you very well. So, speaking very slowly and clearly, I always give my name when someone calls me so they know who they're talking to. And then if I give a phone number of some kind, if I'm referring somebody to somebody else or I'm giving back my phone number, I will very clearly enunciate each number so that they get those numbers very clearly. I'm sure you've had experiences where someone said blah 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 blah, blah, and you can't understand what the number was, and then you try to call it and it's wrong. So just be sure to speak slowly and clearly, especially with things like numbers. I always try to use documents to back up conversations. So I had a little packet of material that I would take with me on initial site visits. If I had a particular program that I thought might work well for them, I would take the little flyer about it. If there was something, some informational piece, maybe they didn't know what certain plants were, but I kind of had an idea, I might print out something about that plant. Use documents to back up conversations. I am a person who has very poor auditory memory. So oftentimes I will meet with someone in a situation like that and they'll tell me something and it'll go one ear and out the other, not because I'm not paying attention, but just because I don't have good auditory memory. And so if someone hands me something visual to back up that auditory conversation, that always helps me. Then also, I definitely use emails as documentation. I avoid texts for anything other than, I'm coming today. Are you still there? Little notifications, maybe directions to their place. I would use text for that. But anything else that has anything to do with the plan itself or any information about the site, I would actually use email and ask them to respond by email so that we have a document of that conversation and I can go back and review that later if I need to. And then definitely with any cooperator, define your acronyms. We live in acronym soup, and it can be really intimidating and overwhelming to people to not know what the acronyms are. So I would definitely make sure that your cooperator, some of them are going to know them, but especially if you're working with new cooperators, defining your acronyms is just critical. Okay, so we're going to go off into the realm of another thing I probably shouldn't talk about, but I'm going to anyway because this has helped me so much. This is something not in the CD world at all. This is just kind of a thing I found somewhere else. And it's basically kind of categorizing people, not labeling them, but kind of categorizing people into different groups. Okay. And you're going to kind of deal with these different types differently because their values are different. So there's an air person, and I'm sure you know people like this. They're light, they're bubbly, they like to have fun, they may laugh a lot. They're full of ideas, but they sometimes don't necessarily follow through all the way with the ideas. Do you know people like this? Those are air people. Okay. Then there's water people. They kind of characterized by flow. Okay. They're kind of steady, they're kind of quiet, they're kind of detail oriented. You might have an air person make up the idea and then a water person follow through with it because that might be something that would help the idea actually get to completion. Water people value comfort and they don't like to go outside of their comfort zone very much. They get real nervous and uncomfortable if they have to go into something that they're not familiar with without a little time to adjust, okay? Then there are fire people. These people are quick to act. They act with passion. They value getting to the goal. They might run over some other people along the way. Maybe you know some people like this. I have a daughter who's a flaming redhead, and she actually walks super fast and with purpose. And so you can kind of tell what kind of person people are by the way that they act and the way that they move. An earth person is very self-contained. They're very self-confident. They trust their own intuition a lot, and they value perfection. So they can sometimes be a little hard to please because if you're not perfect, they're going to be disappointed in you. They may not have too much patience for other people's ideas because they are so self-contained and self-confident in themselves. So the two personal types that have more energy are air and fire, and the two personal types that have less energy are generally water and earth people. Now, when we talk about this is definitely 4 boxes, and there's way more people in the world than 4 boxes, right? And all of us have characteristics like this, but everybody leads with one type or another type. You may have some characteristics of a fire person, but you may actually be a water person, okay? In most of the things that you do, you're going to lead with that type, okay? Now, the way that I use these types is really interesting. So I learned this. I have 6 children. They're very different from each other. I had a son who I would buy Christmas presents and birthday presents for, and I would buy him things that I would like to wear, and he never liked them. He thought that they were terrible, and he wasn't mad about it. He just didn't wear them. And then when I found out about the types, I thought, oh, well, he's different than I am, and he enjoys different things than I do. He likes things that are very black and white. He likes things that are kind of classic lines or bold or something like that. That's very different than me. And that's okay. And when I started buying him presents like that, he suddenly enjoyed them a whole bunch more, wore them all the time. And so the way to use these types is not to say, well, you're this kind of person and therefore I'm not going to work with you because you're that kind of person. Just understanding the different types helps you understand that other people may not approach a problem or value things the same way that you do. That's okay. You might need to tweak your approach a little bit for a person that's a fire person, for example, versus an earth person. That's useful information to have. That's a super helpful tool. If you understand that and you can kind of figure out what people value and where they're going with that, you can put them in the places, especially in like partnerships or group activities or a group meeting. You can help them to succeed. Each type has some characteristics that can be positive or negative depending on the context, and they'll succeed better in certain situations than in others if they're of a certain type. So also just remembering that those characteristics, I mean, somebody could be very forceful, but they also are very committed and motivated. So it might be a negative thing or it might be a positive. It's the same thing. It's just 2 ways of looking at it, right? Actually looking at people and pointing out what's positive about the thing that you're noticing, the characteristics that you're noticing in them, and commenting on it. Again, none of us really get that from anybody. So if you can, even ornery people, if you take that orneriness and you look at it and you say, okay, what's the positive side of this particular characteristic? And then comment on that. Wow, I see that you're a very motivated person. That can actually help them feel a lot more heard and seen. Okay, so you're going to be able to bridge some gaps if you can use them this way, and then use those people's gifts to their and the project's advantage. So if I'm working in a team and I give certain assignments to somebody based on their type and what they're going to succeed at, well, then that project is going to go a lot better, and it's going to be completed a lot faster, and the details are going to get handled a lot better. Okay, so we've talked about working one-on-one with cooperators or other people. Now we're going to talk about working with multiple people. And when I do my basic training, I talk a lot about go to the assessor's website and make sure that you got all the people that are on that are owners of the property, right? Because sometimes, and this has happened, I've gone to a site, I start working with the cooperator, halfway through the plan, I realized that the owner is somebody else, the landowner is somebody else. And so oftentimes you're needing to work with multiple people. One time I had 10 owners on a single piece of property, and they all had to agree with each other about stuff. We didn't get anything done on that property because there were just too many different ideas, and nobody was motivated to really do anything. But identify your decision makers. Make sure that you know who the people are that have the authority to sign off on the things, okay? Make sure you know who those people are. And then I would actually also identify all the other stakeholders, anybody else that's involved with that project or program, and figure out who they are and what their role is. And then also make sure to listen to the quiet voices. Recently, we had a project in our CD where um, the planner was having some communication issues with the cooperator, and she couldn't figure out why. She was trying to do what he asked her to do, and turns out that he was going home and talking with his wife about it. Well, we hadn't heard anything about the wife's ideas about stuff, but she had a lot of control actually of what was going on with that project, and she was actually the one that wanted it to happen, and the cooperator that we were working with wasn't all that invested. And so make sure that you're listening to everybody. Make sure that you've got everybody's perspective. It's going to come up in meetings as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about managing emotional situations. These could be difficult people. This could be just like an emotional situation. Actually, the natural disasters that we sometimes end up helping out with can be something that causes some friction and some uncomfortableness and some anger maybe sometimes. So here are some tips for this. And what I'd like you to do is, if you have any questions about this, because this is something that's really important, but I won't be able to spend very much time on it. If you'll stick some questions into the chat, that would be great. My first suggestion here is to make sure that you're focusing on the real issues. Again, sometimes the surface is anger, but sometimes what's really happening with that person is something else. And you may not even know what it is. Okay. You may not have a clue what it is. I would highly recommend that you don't make assumptions about what other people's attitudes are. Sometimes, if someone's mad at you, you can think, oh, I must have done something wrong, or that person's just being mean to me. But oftentimes, even those things are something that is something entirely unrelated to you, and that anger is coming from somewhere else. So make sure that you're keeping the end goal in sight. What is the purpose of you meeting? What is the purpose of you being there? And make sure that you keep that conversation focused on that end goal and what are the steps to get there. Oftentimes, if you can do that, if you can get past enough anger that you can have somebody actually listen to you, that sometimes is a trick. But if you can get everybody to focus on the end goal, then suddenly everybody kind of goes, oh, wait a minute, none of that personal stuff that I'm dealing with, it has anything to do with this, and they'll start moving towards that goal. Remember that sometimes there are some power dynamics. Now, as an older woman, I have been actually been had some interesting situations because of my age. There's been a little bit of ageism, believe it or not, in my life. There's been a little bit of men talking down to me in my life. And so these things happen. And I don't think that it's important necessarily to like get on your high horse and, have a little, uh, uh, what would you say? Like I'm going to change their minds kind of moment. But actually, people respect you if you can keep kind of a calm and confident energy and not allow yourself to get torn down by someone who's just angry, that or trying to impose their will on you. That can actually go a long way. Like if you know who you are and why you're there and you stick with that, um, respecting your own boundaries as well. Like, I know that I don't like to be yelled at. So one time I was on the phone with a cooperator and he was yelling at me because he didn't like beavers. And he was really mad about the beavers and he started yelling at me and he yelled at me for a good 5 minutes on the phone. I just hung up on him because I'm not willing to listen to someone be that angry with me. I called him back a little while later and asked him if he was okay. You know, but I wasn't going to sit there and let him just yell at me about something I had no control over. So set limits and consequences for yourself. If something gets to this point, this is my action that I'm going to do to get myself out of the situation or to and that was actually respecting his boundaries as well, because it's not good for other people to get into that state where they're out of control. You're allowing them some time to get themselves together, and then you call them back later and see if they're okay. Then, if it's really bad, and maybe not when it gets to be so bad that you think, boy, this is really bad, get help and support. So you have other people in your conservation district who have also been through some of these kinds of experiences and dealt with some of these kinds of people, and they may have really good help for you. If you need to transfer to a different planner, maybe that particular personality is not working with you, and maybe you like pass them off to another planner. Maybe you get your district manager to come in and have a conversation with that person. So there's lots of different ways to kind of manage those more emotional situations. I would highly recommend that you do some more studying on this and thinking about it because it will come up. And to have your boundaries and limits set up ahead of time and consequences to them for their bad behavior set up ahead of time, then it's much, much easier than if you're trying to think this up in a heated moment. So we're going to talk a little bit about institutional communications. These are things like public speaking and outreach events, when you're out in public and you're speaking to other people. Sometimes this is public speaking, which is more embarrassing because you're standing up in front of a bunch of people and speaking. Some of it's more of a one-on-one kind of conversation, but there may be other people around who are also listening. So for these institutional kinds of events, I would say prepare in advance. Um, Definitely having a little practice in your back pocket is helpful. You can prepare elevator speeches, which you should be doing anyway. For any kind of plan that you're doing, any kind of program that you're doing, you should have a 2 sentence thing that you can say about that thing. Okay, if you're public speaking, I like to do outlines. Some people like to do a script where they're actually reading from it. I cannot work that way. I can't sound natural if I'm working from a script. But if that's what you need to do and you're comfortable doing that, great. Use your script. Use an outline. Speaking with energy and enthusiasm. So you might be able to tell that I take this particular um, uh, advice to heart. I was a theater geek, so and a singer, so I know that your presentation has a lot to do with how people respond back to you. And if you speak with energy and enthusiasm, you're going to get energy and enthusiasm back from the audience or from the person that you're talking to. Human beings are actually very social creatures, and we take social cues from each other. And that's super instinctual, and people may not even realize that they're doing it. But if you speak with energy and enthusiasm, they will tend to speak back that way or think back that way. And then again, when you're speaking in public, this is huge and big, and it seems super simple, but it's a little bit tricky to do. So you might try to practice it. Is to speak slowly and clearly. Now, I don't know if you know the story about the big mouth frog, but there was a frog and he spoke with his mouth really big. And he went around and said, "Hey, what do you eat?" And the animals would say, "Oh, I eat, flies." Or the other animals would say, "Oh, I eat algae off the bottom of the river," or something. And he went to an alligator and said, "What do you eat?" And the alligator said, "I eat big mouth frogs." And he said, "Ooh." So Don't speak like the little mouth frog, speak like the big mouth frog. Make your mouth make the words. It feels weird, but if you look in the mirror, it's actually not that big, okay? You will probably never speak as big as you feel like you're speaking, but speak slowly and clearly so that people understand the words. Now, when you're working with partners and funders, these are kind of bigger groups, okay? And I want you to understand a little bit about how to deal with folks in those realms. You want to understand what their institutional goals are. This might be a little bit tricky actually to find out what their institutional goals are. But you want to know what the point is. So, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. They're tasked with protecting fish and wildlife, okay? That's their overall goal. Now, maybe you have some local folks who have specific local goals. It would really be nice when you're talking with them to ask them what those are and to try to get into their heads. What are they trying to accomplish? How are they trying to accomplish it? If you understand that better, you are going to create a bridge between you and that other person when you're talking with them because you're working together towards the same goal. Back to what's our end goal, right? It's really important for you when you're working with partners and funders to clarify their limits and their opportunities they can offer you. So, what can they do? What can't they do? What can they offer to whatever thing you're doing? This I'm thinking about this actually from a specific instance when we were working with the wildfires. In our conservation district, we took the role in the big fires in 2014 of trying to coordinate lots of different agencies and organizations. We had a big meeting with probably 70 people in it from all the different agencies and organizations. And we got up and said, "Hey, we need to know what can you do? What can you offer to people that are in this situation? What can't you do? And what are your rules?" And we had long conversations after that meeting about that. And we actually created like a list of all the different organizations and what they managed and what they couldn't manage, what their rules were, what they could offer. Sometimes that changed over time. Oftentimes it changes, especially in an emergency like that. Like they can't do things, but then later they can. That helped us a lot. We were able to be kind of a central location for people. We didn't deal with social things like health or housing or more people kind of oriented stuff, but anything that had to do with land, we just sent out the word and said, "Call us and we'll tell you where to go." And so people would call us and they would say, "We need fencing." Well, we can do that. We'll put you on our list. Well, we need um, emergency management to come and do something. We go, "Okay, well, here's emergency management's information, and we'll send you over there." You may not have all the things. You can't do all the things. So it's good to know what everybody else can do. Okay. And then creative problem solving. This also is a really good example of creative problem solving because our conservation district director, our manager, came to us right 2 days after the fire started, and they kept going for like a few weeks after that. Um, he said, what do we want to do?" And we all said, "We don't know what we can do, but we want to help. No matter what, we want to help." And that team decided, okay, well, we're going to try some stuff. And we tried doing some different pieces, and some of them were great and some of them didn't work at all. But we took all those resources that we had, and we had this big meeting. We found out what everybody else could do, and we puzzled pieces together to make a really smooth experience for people that called us. We were able to take their basic contact information, refer them to other agencies and organizations, even the social ones that were available at the time. We were able to collect a lot of information from them so that we could then request funding from the state. And then we got a ton of stuff done. We got millions of dollars on the ground within a couple 3-year period because we were able to creatively problem solve with our partners, with our funders, and find out what those other folks are doing. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about writing. I'm gonna give you some specific tips, general tips, and then we'll talk about different kinds of writing. Okay. We talked before about being clear and being brief. So, clarity, brevity, get to the point. Make sure that your point is clear. Now, oftentimes this is difficult when you're just first learning how to do these kinds of writing exercises. Um, Oftentimes I tell people, read it out loud. Read it and pretend that someone is sitting across from you and try to get the point across to them through your voice. And that actually, writing is just an offshoot of actual, like, oral communication. And if you get the oral communication right, then oftentimes the writing comes much, much easier. So imagine your audience, figure out who they are, figure out what is important to them, figure out how you're going to approach the topic in order to inform them or ask them for something. And just do it orally first. Maybe you have I like to do like a brainstorm, right? Make sure that you're covering all the bases. So I'll write all the things. I don't know if you guys have used word webs before, but I use word webs a lot. So you take your topic and you circle it on a piece of paper, and then you write all the things that relate to that thing, and you connect them with a little line. Then you take each of those things that related. Each of those things has, 5 or 6 other words attached to it, and you connect them together. Sometimes one over here will connect to one over here, so you draw a big line around there. Those connections actually help you see the flow of how something should be put across, because those connections are ways that you can link things together, link ideas together, okay? So you're starting with a brainstorm, you're writing all the stuff down, do your word webs, learn the connections, and then you're going to work towards flow, okay? And you're going to try to get it as clear and as brief and as quick to the point as you can get it, okay? Don't be afraid of repetition, especially in things like grant applications. People are reading this thing and they may miss it the first time. So don't be afraid to repeat things. Then spend a ton of time on editing. I just did the grants class a little while ago, and I said leave lots of time for editing, 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 because editing is going to take you longer than actually writing the thing. So give yourself some good time for editing, and what you're trying to achieve is that flow to the point, right? And then review. I would actually, especially if it's something that you haven't written, a kind of thing that you've written before, get someone else's eyes on it. Get anybody else's eyes on it and see, am I being clear? Am I using acronyms that they don't understand? Am I using technical language that they don't understand? How can I incorporate those and explain them in a way that makes sense and doesn't interrupt the flow of the actual writing? And then just have, like I say, have other people review it for you. Other people's eyes and other people's opinions will help a ton when you're writing. And then I have a pet peeve about passive voice. so so I'm gonna give you a minute. So I find this hilarious myself, but I actually have a big thing about passive voice. Oftentimes in scientific writing, we use this passive voice, and we say things were had something done to them. Don't use passive voice, okay? If you want your writing to get to the point, to motivate people, to get people to take action, you have to use active voice. It seems like a picky little thing about it, but people respond, as I said before, people respond to your energy with energy of their own. So if you say, "We went and did this thing. We got this thing and then we test them. We collected the samples and then we tested them." Somebody did something. Somebody did some action, okay? Or we say the samples were collected. There's no person involved in that. There's no action involved in that. It's just this thing happened to this stuff. and it's not nearly as compelling. Okay. The others really are just for fun, but I do love the clickbait and conspiracy because you see this in advertising all the time. You see it on Facebook, you see it in Instagram, you see it on TikTok. You won't believe what happened next. These are being used because they motivate people to do stuff. They motivate people to click on the item, right? And as we'll talk about in a minute, getting people to click on the item is a very important thing. And it means people actually take action. And this is going to come in really handy as we're writing different articles and outreach items. So, articles, say for your newsletter, for your conservation district newsletter, you might be asked to write articles for the local newspaper. You may have other outreach items like flyers or brochures about different programs or something. When you're writing for these, it's a little bit different than writing for other purposes. The very most important thing to remember is this, that the first things should come first. The point of your article should come in the first sentence or two, maybe, but I would always put it in the first sentence. Your summary and your major points come in the very beginning, first paragraph. Okay. With this kind of writing, it's not like an essay that you wrote in college. Okay. It's not give an intro, then do point one, then do point number two, then do point number three, and then summarize. No, put your summary right at the beginning. Make sure that, because here's what happens with articles and outreach items. The people who are putting those together are going to cut the bottom first. Okay? If they don't have enough room, they're going to start cutting from the bottom up. So you want the main point to be right at the beginning. Then you want to hook them in, you want to catch people's interest. And there's all kinds of things you can say about this. The clickbait one, what's going to happen next? Those are actually hooks, and those capture people's attention. Now, I'm not encouraging you to use those in these kinds of articles and outreach items, but it is cool to actually have something that's a little different, or something that's unusual, or something that catches people's attention. Go study hooks is my point here, because they're really important to get people to read the rest of the article. You really, 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 whenever you're doing an article or an outreach item, please don't forget to put a call to action. Oftentimes we're writing stuff and we think, oh, if we give people the information, they're going to know what to do next. And oftentimes they don't. So you want to definitely put in there, if you have any questions, go to this email address. If you want some assistance, click on this button. If you have this, then go do this. Make sure you tell them what to go do next, because it's not always going to be obvious. And as we use social media more, there's going to be less and less and less and less room to assume that people are just going to know what to do next. Okay, you're in competition with a lot of other stuff that people are reading and looking at and having interactions with. You want them to go, oh, we get here, we go there. Okay. Edit, get to the point. Eliminate any unnecessary words. If you're using is a lot in your writing, you should figure out other ways to say things. Cut and cut and cut and cut. There's always a way. English is great for this because we have 50 ways of saying the same thing. Okay. Many other languages, it's not the case. But in English, we have 50 ways for you to say something. So choose the shortest route to get there. Okay, now we're going to talk about writing more technical material. Sometimes this is sections in a grant application, maybe, where you're talking about the problem. Maybe it's more of a technical journal article or something. Definitely do your research and know your subject, but you want to make sure that you're defining it for other people. So you may know it really well, and you may understand all the technical terms, and you may understand all the acronyms, and you may understand all the methods and techniques that you've used to do this technical work with, but other people will not. So you may have to lead them a little bit and give them a breadcrumb trail to where you want them to be as far as what they understand about your subject. Okay, so don't be afraid to kind of lead them along a little bit. It depends on your audience. So it might sound like you're dumbing something down if you've got a very technically savvy audience, but I would still rather err on the side of leading people to where you want them to be than to leave somebody in the dark because you assumed that they understood. Okay? Now use what I call the roller coaster method for writing anything, really. Is you want to give them the 30,000-foot view. What is the big picture of what's going on? Then dive down into the details and then back up to the 30,000-foot view. Okay? This just, it's part of that flow I was talking about earlier. The way that you start is give people that vision of what you're talking about and then go into the details, gradually go into the details, tell them all the stuff, and then back out again and summarize with the big picture. Okay. And then whenever you're writing something technical, especially these pieces of grant applications or something, you really want to think about how is this material going to be used in the future. Maybe you're helping write, we just wrote a community wildfire protection plan. That writing is going to be pointed in a particular direction. And it's going to have certain paragraphs in it that we can then use to justify actual projects and put that wording into a grant application. And so you want to kind of think through, how is this thing that I'm writing going to be used in the future? Is it a newspaper article where people are just going to read it, maybe go to the website or something and then throw the paper away? Or is it going to be used in some bigger, badder way later? Then you're going to write in things at the level that you want them to be so that you can accomplish the future goal as well as the immediate goal of whatever you're writing. Okay, persuasive requests. I'm actually going to refer you to the first class that we did in this series called From Vision to Funding, Grant Writing for Planners. And this can be used for other kinds of persuasive writing as well. I talk there a lot about how to get people to give you money and what kinds of techniques you can use. We go a little bit more into how to write those and what funders are kind of looking for. But persuasive requests can be as simple as maybe you want to buy a certain piece of equipment or something, and your district manager and your board need some kind of justification for you purchasing that piece of equipment. And so you can do a persuasive request or a little white paper, and basically you're just laying out, okay, these are the things, this is why I need this, this is the piece of equipment, this is why I need this piece of equipment, this is how it's going to help me. But the most important thing is, this is how it's going to help you as an organization, as individual people. Our cooperators are going to benefit because of XYZ. Don't just give the stuff, but give the why. Make sure you put in there, why is it important that we have this? What is going to happen? What is the goal going to be that we achieve because we're getting this? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about organizing and leading meetings. Like I said, if you're in this world for very long, this conservation district world for very long, you will eventually organize and lead a meeting of some kind, somewhere, for somebody. So I like to actually start with understanding your organization and its vision for the future. So, and sometimes this is easy to find. Sometimes it's in a 5-year plan. Sometimes it's in, you can kind of go to other meetings and kind of absorb what that vision is supposed to be. Oftentimes with conservation districts, our vision is cleaner water, healthier animals, wildlife that is managed properly. Those are kind of the vision and the purpose of that meeting. And it's really important when you're having a meeting that you understand your own organization's visions and what you're trying to achieve. Because you may be meeting with lots of other people from different organizations that have different visions. That doesn't mean you can't work together. That doesn't mean you can't help each other achieve the visions of these different organizations, but you want to be clear about who you are and where you're coming from. I would pretty immediately in organizing at least a new meeting. If you're leading a meeting that's been happening for a while, you can kind of go and see how that meeting's being run. But if I'm starting a new meeting, I would try to define some roles and responsibilities, and that will actually evolve over time and may not be able to be done in the first meeting. But within the first few meetings, you're going to kind of want to figure out who's doing what and who's responsible for what and who's going to be accountable for what activities and actions. Okay, it's important, super important. Seems again like not a thing that we need to talk about, but coordinating the group communications is actually something of a job in itself. Making sure that people are able to get to the meeting, that if there's online participants, that online system is working well, that you're emailing everybody and not forgetting somebody, that everybody kind of knows the purpose of what's happening, and that if there's a problem, who they can contact. That's a big responsibility, actually. And so that's something to kind of to think about when you're organizing and leading these meetings, is how are you going to organize and coordinate those communications, especially when the meeting is not actually happening. A lot of that will happen within your meeting, but a lot of it actually happens outside of that as well. um, Excuse me. Agendas and notes in meetings. I cannot tell you the importance of these. I can't overstate it because they're really important. And when I've been a secretary for a meeting, I am currently secretary for a couple of different regular meetings. And what I find is if I can set up the agenda properly with the input from all the people who need to give it to me, then that is actually the basis for my notes. And I can save the agenda and then make another copy and write notes in the agenda. And that actually saves me a ton of time from having to go back and rewrite all the notes from scratch, right? But a well organized agenda will help you get a meeting done faster. Now, nobody loves to sit through long, long meetings. Nobody, not a single soul I know, enjoys sitting through a 3-hour meeting. I have the group that I currently do, I'm a secretary for, has a goal of 30-minute meetings. And we have very seldom gone over 30 minutes. I think our longest was 34 meetings. 34 minutes meeting. You can get meetings done a lot faster. You can if you're organized and you keep the group moving. So, order of operations. This is sort of a very rough outline of an agenda. I would go big picture down to goals. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the steps? And then what are we going to do and who's going to do it? Those are the action items. And then back up to the big picture. Have we covered everything? You should keep in mind your participants' capacity and resources. So maybe you have some other partners in the room, but you know that Fish and Wildlife staff, they're under the gun, they're trying to get something accomplished in the next 2 months, and they just don't have the capacity to help with something. Maybe you can share those goals around with some of the other partners. So being aware of what each participant's capacity and resources are is really helpful. Using SMART goals, we talk about this a lot, but these are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And I would actually add visible. How are you going to remind people to do these goals? What is your process for actually helping people to keep them in front of their face so that they can go do the thing? Oftentimes, and I find this when I'm super, super busy, I'll take notes, I'll star the things that I need to do right away. And then maybe those notes get put down for a while and I forget to go do the thing. So oftentimes it's helpful if people are in the meeting to encourage them to write down a time for them to accomplish whatever action item they have been assigned, write it down in their calendar. And that way, at least they know that they need to do that thing. And maybe they need to put that off a couple of weeks in their calendar, but at least that way they're still time bound to that activity. Okay. And then definitely having accountability. When you come back together, you've got your action steps that were supposed to be done. Maybe you need to send a text halfway through between the meetings and say, hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Remember to go do this thing. And then at the next meeting, everybody comes back and reports. And then you can start with your order of operations again. We accomplished this. Now, what do we need to continue to do? Then what are the goals that we're trying to achieve? Then our action items again. What are we going to do in the next period before the next meeting? And then have we missed anything? Oops, sorry, I went backwards. Okay, so how do we do this? We do this with good agendas and notes, okay? I will try to provide some agenda templates in the outline that I've already given to Jan to upload with the recording of this and the PDFs of the slides. In that class outline, there's actually a link to some agenda templates. It was just an article I found that has like 9 different kinds. It doesn't really matter what kind you use because you're going to find one that works for you and some others that don't really work for you. So if you're the secretary, definitely work with the secretary. Find something that works well for them. That secretary job is, in my opinion, by far more important than any other job in a meeting, is that secretary and making sure that everything is happening the way that it should, that it's being recorded the way that it should be, and it's easy to refer to later. Again, prepare your notes ahead if you can. If you can use the agenda template and then just add things in, then that can really help save a lot of time for your secretary, and then keep the meeting moving. Make sure that you're not over allocating time to people's oh gosh, my brain just went blank, but perfect timing. So I thank you for coming. We are going to answer some questions if you guys have questions, but it's going to take me a minute to figure out how to get back into the Zoom meeting. I do have 2 email addresses that I'm going to give you. One is my Okanagan CD email. The second one, after June 30th, I may or may not be still working for Okanagan CD, depending on funding. So my second email address is there. That's my business email, and you're welcome to email me any questions or get back with me in any way that you want.